This episode of Nos Arietes is sponsored by Full Pull Wines, a Seattle-based wine retailer and proud sponsor of Nos Arietes since 2011. Full Pull was founded in 2009, is based in Seattle, and is owned and operated by longtime Sounders supporters. They offer the best boutique wines of the world to members of their mailing list, with special focus on their home, the Pacific Northwest.
Hi, I'm Will Bruin, and I was just recognized as a Seattle Sounders legend. Now I get to do voice reads for the Sounder at Heart podcast network.
Here we go. Come on! Hey, O'Shan! Let's go!
A save by Fry! The Seattle Sounders have done it! MLS Cup winners!
Here comes Rangers through the middle to crown it for Seattle! And now they truly can start the celebrations. It's the Sounders MLS Cup.
Nicoladero leaves absolutely no doubt! The Sounders rule the region!
Seattle Sounders is campeón!
It's gone! They've scored! Finally!
This feels fucking awesome.
This is a tiny dog.
We want to win. It's Seattle Sounders, bro.
Porter says cheated.
You know, what was the thought process in terms of who you decided to use and who you didn't?
Ever since Sounder Hart wrote a commentary that we didn't take Open Cup seriously.
Welcome to another episode of Nos Arietes, sponsored by Full Pull Wines and the Sounder at Heart subscribers. We're recording on Monday, September 30th, 2024. I am your host, Jeremiah O'Shan. Aaron is on vacation, so friend of the show, Mark Kastner, is here to fill in. Well, I guess the Sounders are good again. Coming off that frustrating tie with the Earthquakes, the Sounders got back to their winning ways with the professional win over the Houston Dynamo. There wasn't really anything special or impressive about their 1-0 win, but it was maybe more important that way, as they showed they could both beat a team that they're likely to face in the playoffs and held on for a one-goal victory. They're now officially in the playoffs, control their destiny for home field advantage in the first round, and have a lot to play for in these final three games. Mark, what did you make of this win, and what do you think it says about this team going forward?
Yeah, I think the game itself had like a very playoff feel to it, at least watching on TV. I don't know.
I'd agree.
I don't know if it was the same being in the stadium or in the press box or whatever, but I just think like the stakes were evident, even if you have to like bend reality a little bit, because they would have qualified regardless of what they did on Saturday night. But it does feel good that the Sounders kind of took matters into their own hands and didn't. It would have felt not great to kind of like back into the playoffs like that.
Absolutely.
But yeah, I just thought it was like a really professional performance. I think there's, kind of listening to what Schmetzer has to say after the game and just kind of like picking up on context clues. I think they pretty much know that the perfect version of this team is probably not going to show up this year, but I still do believe that the version of the team that the coach can get this team to show up is good enough to do some damage and potentially capable of making some special moments in a year that's been lacking in them. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, and it's funny that you say that, because this is a team, because I think that's a pretty good summation, I think, of how we've talked about the team, of how the vibe around the team is. And yet you go back to June 15th, which is the 2-0 win over Minnesota United. And there's actually a story on Sounder at Heart right now that is available to paid subscribers that sort of details how the Sounders have turned the season around. But they're 10-2-2 now in league play in that time. I'm not saying this is going to happen, and there's a lot of distance between where they are now and getting to this point. But if they were to win their last three games, they would probably finish second or third in the West. They would have one of the best second half performances in MLS history. I think they would only be 2 points worse than they were in 2018, which is the best second half performance in MLS history. And yet it doesn't really feel like they're hitting on all cylinders. It doesn't feel like they are like they've played some attractive soccer at times. But they've also had a lot of frustrating. They've seemingly had more frustration than celebration this year, and that's a lot because they've kind of run face first into LAFC at every chance that they've had a chance to do that, and that sort of, I think, is what is looming over all of this. But it's funny. I don't know. It's funny. I have a hard time reconciling that this has both been basically the best team in MLS since that June 15th game. And yet it also feels like it's been a slog and really frustrating.
Yeah, I do suppose that if that other shoe does drop in 2 months or 6 weeks or whatever it is,
right,
then I think you and I probably both naturally have a different feel about how this season went, especially if it's LAFC
that takes them out in the playoffs.
Takes them out in the playoffs last season. Yeah, every competition this season. Right. So it's like basically like 4 straight knockout competitions.
Yeah.
Or whatever it is. But yeah, it's a little weird because typically in kind of like the way MLS functions is turnarounds like this tend to happen when you fire a coach or sign a player.
Right.
And the Sounders have done neither. And it's just kind of like they got healthy.
They got healthy, and they sort of they did make some tactical tweaks, and I think Brian's story does a good job of, but they are like tweaks. They're not dramatic changes. I mean, basically, it's inserting Paul Rothrock into the starting lineup. It's slightly changing the way that you ask the right back to play, and it's maybe giving a little bit more attacking freedom to Obed Vargas. But these are not dramatic changes. These are really tweaks.
Yeah, and like having theoretically your best player be somewhat healthy for a run of games does actually matter, believe it or not.
Yeah, even though are you talking about Pedro de la Vega?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, even though he's not really contributing, the fact that he's on the field does seem to help.
Yeah, it's the quote unquote best player. It's the like,
right? Yeah. No, I got it.
For a lot of money, he's hardly played this season. Yeah. I think our best player is obviously Albert Rusnak, and I think it's crazy that people even have conversations about his contract worth.
I mean, he's been, it is funny if you just go back and you look at their performance since he got healthy, which was around game 5 or 6 of the season. Like, I think his first really healthy game was the 5-0 win over Montreal, and if you just look at their season since then, it's been a pretty good season again outside of those LAFC games.
Yeah, and I do think it's like, it is interesting that this team so obviously needed something to change because it was kind of a slog there for a long time, and it was even more of a slog while things were also turning around because people didn't know that they were turning around yet. So I think that the feeling around this team is different in the last, say, like 7 games when you just voted out 14 games. Because like narratives take a lot longer to shift than like actual facts.
Yeah.
But it is just interesting seeing players play in positions that they're their best positions, but you've for some reason one reason or another haven't seen them there. Like, for instance, earlier this season, I didn't think Christian Roldan looked like a starter playing right mid. He looked slow. He's not creative enough out on the wing. There was like no dynamic relationship with his brother playing right back. Then Alex gets hurt a little bit. Christian plays right back, and it's like completely different. And then now that he's settled into like a central midfield role, which I think is his best position.
It seems at this point, I think it would be crazy to suggest anything otherwise, right?
Yeah, he just looks he looks faster in that area of the pitch than he ever did on the wing, and which makes sense. Yeah, obviously wingers and fullbacks are faster than central midfielder players, but that dynamic aspect of his play that we've gotten so used to since 7-8 years since he's been here, it's like back now that he's just like physically he is 10 to 15 yards in a different spot on the field, and he just looks like a completely refreshed different type of player.
Right. And it's even sort of a similar with the funny thing. I mean, I guess it's maybe unfair to say that it's a similar role to what he was kind of asked to do as a right winger, because he was playing inside so much, but I guess he's playing deeper now than he was then. He's essentially replacing João Paulo at this point.
And he's arriving into the play just completely differently. So when he was on the right wing, he was often the start of a play, like in start of that kind of like action, if you will. Where now he is able to be involved deeper in build up, which I think better suits his strengths the older he gets, because he's just such an intelligent player. And then also, once the ball has finally arrived into taking action in and around the box, he's able to arrive to the ball instead of being stood still and receiving it. And I think that just makes a huge difference for the type of player he is.
Yeah, I think that's probably true. And I suppose we should also mention, and we've talked about this on the show before, but the other big change that happened at that same time was Jordan Morris moving into the number 9 spot and really sort of taking ownership of that spot, which we've seen, man. And that's a big part of this story as well, is Jordan has just really, I would say statistically, it's almost silly to debate whether or not he's better as a 9 right now. Like, you can go back and take the way he played at the end of last year and you combine it with the way he's played this year, and you have the equivalent of a full season of performance at the number 9. And he is performing at an elite level. He's scoring at an elite level. Yet it was funny. We were talking with someone in the press box. Tim and I were talking with someone in the press box on Saturday about this very thing. And I think it sort of, I think, illustrated what people's concern with Morris at the 9 is. And it's sort of vibes. It's well, he hasn't scored in big games, which is true. Like, he hasn't scored recently against LAFC. He has only one career goal against the Timbers, and I think those are really the games where you want to see your number 9 come through. Those are also games, coincidentally, that Raul Ruidiaz has this great history of scoring against LAFC and the Timbers. So Morris hasn't done that. But aside from that sort of semi-statistical point, Morris has really been, it's really just like, he just doesn't give off that number 9 energy the way that they want him to, but he has been really outstanding as a number 9 this year.
Yeah, but I would even push back on that, like, that narrative that he doesn't show up in big games. Like, on the way to the 2019 MLS Cup, he scores a hat trick against Dallas.
Right. Yes.
He's torched the Galaxy previously.
He has a ton of playoff goals.
Yeah.
A ton of big goals against the Galaxy. You're right.
Going even back further to 2016, he has a Jordan-like flu game, Michael Jordan-like, not Jordan Morris, against the Rapids. He scores a goal where I think he even injured his knee.
I mean, he definitely took a nasty hit.
Yeah. So and in his defense, nobody on this team shows up against LAFC or the Timbers anymore. So it's like, I think that what's the point in arguing that?
Yeah, I mean, I do think that speaks more to a failing of the depth of talent. Like, what the Sounders really need is another high-end player, and I think that we've gotten really focused on saying that needs to be a number 9, and we don't need to go too far down this, because we got into this last week, but I think this was just another example, another point in the favor of saying, it's not that Jordan can't be the number 9. It's that the Sounders just need another good attacking player, another goal dangerous player. And sort of the player who has emerged right now is Paul Rothrock. As you know, the sample size is still small, but this is a player who now has 6 goals and 4 assists against MLS competition in leagues play and MLS regular season. You combine between those two competitions, he's averaging basically 0.67 goal contributions per 90 minutes. That's that's very, that's great. That's very, very good. That's right in line with, Albert and Jordan Morris. And if he can continue that, that's really all you can ask, I suppose, at least for now. I, and I thought, Rothrock had the goal in this game. He was, at least in the first half, in the middle of all their dangerous chances. He continues to just put in big performances. It's very impressive.
Yeah, I think it's so interesting that him as a player has emerged as like the answer on the left wing, which has primarily been the black hole for the Sounders since, I mean, there's knock-on effects, but you could go all the way back into last season where Morris was having to play out there, and and then Raul gets hurt and just stuff gets shifted around. But like the style of player he is, without kind of talking about the credit he deserves as like a person and like coming up to, is, I think, like so interesting, because I think a lot of people were like, hey, we need a left winger like this instead of the left winger that Leo Chu was trying to be, or Jordan Morris was trying to be. And it is like, kind of goes further back to where we kind of started this conversation. It was like, it's just a minor tweak. You had a player with this profile. Maybe he's not as good as other players. That's obviously not really up for debate anymore because of the performances he's put in. But it's like, hey, like, we're committed to playing this like idea of the left back that we have. We need a type of winger that pairs with that. And it's no coincidence that in this run of games that Paul Rothrock has been kind of showing out in terms of like actual production on the scoreboard, the team just looks way more solid on the left side now.
Right.
They're like, it plays to Nuhu's strength. It plays to Obed Vargas's strength. It plays to Jackson Reagan's strength a little bit further back and more kind of tucked in. And then when you can trust the left winger to do all the things that Paul Rothrock has been able to do, you end up actually getting the best out of kind of like everybody else on the field.
I think that's a great observation. It's often said that soccer is a weak link sport. And you see that in situations like this, where if you can just improve your weak link on the offensive side, like that's usually often, the weak link sport is oftentimes used as a way of talking about your defense. But it's true probably with your offense too, especially when one of your primary attackers is just not very productive. And that has been the Sounders' problem for a good deal of this season, is that they just aren't getting dynamic movements out of both wings. And for all of Pedro de la Vega's, there is a element of, he doesn't look completely in sync with his teammates. I thought in this game, I really thought he was his most effective that he's been. He was consistently dangerous. He was popping up in good spots. He was a little unlucky not to have a goal or an assist in this one. Like he had a great ball that came sort of rushing into he had two sort of these opportunities where he came rushing in on a sort of second ball. And on one of them, he had it blocked. And on the other one, it was cleared off the line, where it would have either been a goal or a tap in for Jordan Morris. So I was overall encouraged by De La Vega, and he still doesn't have the production numbers that you'd like to see, but he is at least creating danger that has to be accounted for by defenses.
Yeah, and then there's just this level of like effort that both him and Rothrock put in on the wing. And it's not that like other players that have played in those positions this season haven't been trying. Like nobody would ever accuse Christian Roldan of being lazy. That's not, that's not the type of effort I'm talking about. It's an element of like a decision has been made about what I'm going to do with the ball before I get it, and what I'm going to try to make happen here. And I think in kind of the dog days of this season, there like the attack was so like rudimentary and like slow, and it just never like developed fully. But with like the types of players that Rothrock is, and to a much kind of like, I would say, higher ability, although we haven't seen the production with De La Vega, is like they're just going to do something. And it might not work, but they're going to go win the ball back. And because they're like both, I think, very sort of like underrated in terms of their like pressing ability, but they're going to like try something. If it doesn't work, that's fine. We'll recycle it or we'll go win the ball back. But we're constantly going to give the defense or the opponent something to think about. And then I think like that was on display. I wouldn't say perfectly in this game, but you saw like how dangerous the threat of the Sounders attack was, like just from like existing in the mind of the Houston Dynamo. Like they were down maybe several of their ideal 11. I don't know, at least 3 or 4 guys, but still like the thought that the Sounders
certainly
could
2 at the very least.
Yeah.
2 of they're arguably their 2 best players.
Okay. Yeah. Just the idea that the Sounders would be able to like turn around and go do something was clearly there all game, and Houston was worse because of that. So you're right to point out that most people, when talking about a weak link, maybe identify a center back or a goalie that isn't good enough, but
even a left back or a right back.
Yeah, or even defensive midfielders.
Right. Yeah.
But really, like, I think the ideal I think Brian Smetzer has that is actually coming to fruition this season is they're a strong defensive team because of their threat on offense and their ability to, like, you know, they didn't have all the possession in this game. You know, they only scored 1 goal, but the threat of them doing more was there. And that was the platform that the entire team played on. And I think like that level of front footedness is why like Yamar was able to have like a man of the match type performance that he had, why Christian Roldan looks more dynamic, why the wingers are able to kind of like put in the shifts that they did, so on and so forth.
Along those lines, you know, I was just looking at this stat and it jumped out at me. In the second half, Houston had 69% possession. They only took 2 shots. Both of them were from outside the box for a total of 0.05 expected goals. That is what I think the Sounders have been missing this year, is the ability to sort of just kill off a game the way that they did in that one. They didn't have to do it with the ball at their feet all the time, but they did a really good job of just making sure that for all the possession Houston had, it was all in front of it was always in front of them. It was never, they were never behind. They were never struggling to catch up. They were never out of position. It was just a masterclass sort of positional defending type of game, I thought, in the second half.
Yeah, and you called out that possession number. Like, even though the Sounders didn't have the bulk of the possession in the second half, they had more touches in the opposition's box. So that just goes to show you they like, I don't even necessarily think they like played direct in the second half. I think they just kept the game like in front of them and they were completely happy to let it kind of play out there. But when they did get the ball, there was like a purpose with it. They didn't take a bunch of shots, but a lot of that's kind of like they were trying to get the final pass to have the good shot and all that. And I think the most encouraging thing about the game against the Dynamo is the atmosphere around the game felt serious, for like the lack of a better term. And then the game happened on the Sounders' terms. It didn't turn into something that they didn't want it to happen and they had to overcome and still win. It was like, hey, we're not at the races kind of like offensively, but we're still going to win on our terms. And that's what I was most encouraged by, I think.
Yeah. No, I would say that is all fair.
Thank you for listening to the Sounder at Heart Podcast Network, which now includes No Sarietes, Lobbing Scorchers, and the Cooler Guild. We've been independent since August of 2023, but need your support to make sure it continues. Although this podcast is free, it's only made possible by your continued support. Memberships start as low as $25 a year, which not only helps make podcasts like this one happen, but also gets you access to everything we produce. If you're able to support us at higher levels, starting at $75 a year, you gain access to a host of other perks, most notably entry into our members-only Discord, where the smartest, funniest, and most engaged commenters share their thoughts and ideas. To find out more, just visit sounderatheart.com and click the subscribe button in the top right corner. Thanks for listening.
What did you make, as we go down into this last 3 games? Like I mentioned, they control their own destiny. Now that would probably require, for them to get home field advantage, they probably need to go undefeated in these last 3 games. They almost certainly need to win at least 2, if not all 3 of these games. But they do control, that's not outside of the realm of possibility. First big test is against Vancouver. That's on Wednesday. This feels like a point where they can really start making some statements, right? Like they're going to be on the road against Vancouver, on the road against Rapids, and then at home against the Timbers. They have an opportunity to really make a statement in these last few games.
Yeah, and I think they kind of like have to if this season's going to mean like anything.
Yeah.
Like realistically, I don't think the Sounders are going to win MLS Cup. That doesn't mean I think they can't. I just think
I got you.
However, you don't have to win MLS Cup to have a successful season. You can kind of like show your intent. And I think like this year, for better or worse, has turned into like a transition year.
Yeah.
And which is a bummer because it's the 50th anniversary. It could have been a year to like make a big statement.
And they also had, and I think it's also worth saying that they have something like peak performances from Jordan, from Yamar. They've got a lot of players in their prime, a lot of good players in their prime who are performing at the top of their game, and they just aren't getting the support level that they need for this to be a true contender, I think is maybe what you're getting at.
But like, if you look around MLS, nobody's like really playing well right now. I have some theories about why that is. Like taking a break in the middle of the season to play a stupid tournament, probably not a good idea.
Yeah. But, I mean, it's funny. I was just looking at this. I'm going to share this stat because I think it's interesting. Inter Miami is on something like a 8-game unbeaten streak. They've only lost once in their last like 15 games, but they've drawn 3 straight games.
Yeah.
And they haven't looked particularly good. Columbus obviously is kind of in a similar boat where, they just got their doors blown off by the Sounders. They drew a very winnable game this last week. And these are the 2 top contenders. Cincinnati has really kind of fallen off. And then the West is even more wide open, I think.
Yeah, I think like in particular, the West is like the Sounders aren't going to finish first in like the regular season, but if you look at the teams ahead of them, like kind of benching like the voodoo around LAFC aside, I don't think that the Galaxy are that much better. They have 2 players that I think are better than anybody else on the Sounders, but how those 2 pieces end up fitting together doesn't still like is still a little weird for them. Like the fact that Colorado and Salt Lake have more points than the Sounders currently is, or are on the same amount of points, is a testament more to like the Sounders lacking this season more than it does to, I think, either of those 2 teams, which I hope not a lot of fans from those 2 teams listen to this podcast. It'd be weird if they did, but hey, if you are listening. So I do think like do they have to win these 3 games? No. But if you start looking at the 3 games individually, you feel really bummed if they lose or draw any.
I agree with that fully. If any one of these results will feel like a big letdown if they don't win.
So you end up coming back around to being like, no, yeah, you got to win.
Right. You may as well.
Yeah. And they don't play they haven't played particularly well against teams like on the same amount of points or more than them. So you got the next game is a team that's on the same amount of points as them, ahead of them in the standing because of goal differential or wins.
Well, no, that's the next game is Vancouver, but
right. Sorry.
The game after that is Rapids. You're talking about the Rapids.
Yes. I'm trying to make a convoluted point that they should just win.
They should just win. They should. I mean, and honestly, like the Whitecaps are, for as much as the Sounders might be playing on. I mean, the Sounders should be relatively fresh, certainly compared to the Whitecaps. The Whitecaps in league play are in the middle of a 3-game winless run. They did beat Toronto in the Canadian Championship, but they are going to be. They're playing on much more tired legs than the Sounders are, theoretically. The Sounders just came off a 10-week or 10-day break. So the Sounders should be more fresh for this game. The Sounders have a decent history of success in Vancouver. This is the kind of game that the Sounders should absolutely be targeting as a winnable match. They need to, and this is a total aside, but they also need a win to keep their hopes alive in the Cascadia Cup, which, I realize is more of an end. Like winning the Cascadia Cup is not itself a huge goal, but this year, if they were to win the Cascadia Cup, it would do a huge boost to their, if they need to win these 2 games, if they win these 2 games again and against Cascadia opponents, they would win the Cascadia Cup, but they would also do a huge boost to both their very real prospects, but also sort of the vibes around the team. So, yeah, I mean, I think the Whitecaps game absolutely should be a game that they go into as, we should win this. It would be nice to get a point.
Yeah, and obviously, depending on how the games go, they have an opportunity to finish the season as like the best defensive team in the league. Like, at least based on goals allowed, which I think is a pretty important.
That's the metric I think that we all. Yeah.
And so they should win all 3. All 3 should be a shutout, and then they'll go into the playoffs feeling like anything could happen. Because I think realistically, at least in the West, anything can happen. Like they don't have to. Like the reality of last season's sort of situation happening again, where they draw LAFC, pretty much beat the brakes off of them, but this time actually end up scoring a few of those goals they should have, where it goes in to halftime 2-0 and the game's effectively done. Like that could happen. That reality is not very far away from what's possible this season. So, and then if LAFC is not in the way, I feel good about the chances of playing any other team.
Yeah.
If these next 3 games go well.
Yeah, and the way that the playoffs stack up right now, the Sounders would be on the road playing a best of 2 or 3 with 2 road games against the Rapids in the 4-5 meeting, and then the Galaxy would be presumably waiting in the Western Conference semifinals, and LAFC would have to navigate they would play the Houston Dynamo in the first round, who, by the way, the Dynamo just beat LAFC, didn't they? And then they would play RSL in the second round. I don't know that it's a given that they're going to get through that. I will take I would take the Sounders' chances the way the playoffs are lining up today. Frankly, I would take those chances, and we'll see. We're going to get a much better sense of that in the next few weeks for sure. But I do feel reasonably good, I would say, about where the Sounders are heading down the stretch here. But there was one other big thing that got discussed. Almost, I was surprised at how big of a deal they made of it in the postgame. But I want to take a break. We'll come back and we'll do a little segment on the Club World Cup, which we found out the Sounders will be playing all 3 of their group stage games at home, which is big news. But I was honestly a little surprised at how big of a deal the Sounders made out of that on Saturday. But why don't we take a break? We'll come back. We'll talk about that. You're listening to Nos Audietis. Welcome back to Nos Audietis. So, as you probably know by now, it was announced on Saturday that the Sounders would be hosting all 3 of their group stage games at the Club World Cup, which is a pretty big deal. If you don't know, the Club World Cup in next year is going to be an expanded Club World Cup. There's going to be 32 teams. Among those 32 teams are legitimately most of the biggest clubs in the world. We're talking Bayern Munich, Real Madrid, Chelsea, Juventus, Inter Milan, most of the big club, Boca Juniors, River Plate, go on and on. It's most of the world's biggest clubs are going to be at this tournament. And there's a very real possibility that the Sounders will host some games in that tournament. Or I'm sorry, they will host some games for sure, but they will host some of those teams' games. And it'll be interesting to see how that all plays out. But one of the things that I think is going to be interesting is I'm curious how big of a deal fans see this as, but B, how getting out of the group would be a very different kind of group, and getting the biggest games possible would be another. Like, if I think internally the Sounders are probably hoping for give us the biggest opponents possible, and we don't really care if we get out of the group. Whereas I would imagine most fans would probably think, no, I would like a manageable group because I want to see how far we can go in this thing. I don't know. Where do you fall? Like, do you think people are going to care about the Club World Cup? You might have a better sense of this than I do.
I don't want to be the bubble popper or the balloon.
That's okay.
Popper,
that's what I'm looking for here.
But I'm kind of looking at the schedule of when this is supposed to happen.
Yeah.
And it's 4 weeks after a Champions League final.
Yeah.
That's I could very realistically see a team like one of the big European teams, like Bayern Munich, for instance, being like, we just played a 60 game season. We're not cutting our preseason short, but we'll do the kind of commercial song and dance around it. So that, or Real Madrid is probably going to have there's no Euros next year, but there is other kind of competitions that their players go play internationally. So I think European teams will treat it as a summer preseason friendly thing, that they do every year.
And it should be said, this is a month earlier than what normally European teams would be coming to the United States for preseason, right?
Yeah, it's
because the idea that it's just sort of the natural part of their preseason. It actually falls between what would normally be their. I mean, this is this is off season normally for European teams, right?
Yeah, it should be. Although it doesn't seem like they get to do that anymore.
Right.
It seems because they added more games to the Champions League.
Right.
Seasons tend to go deeper and deeper. For some reason, there's 2 international breaks in the fall, which doesn't make any sense for anything. And you have players on Manchester City and Arsenal and the high end teams being we are playing too much.
Yeah. There was.
Yeah.
I saw a Thief Pro, which I learned this week is an actual they actually have bargaining power among UEFA competitions. They apparently do have the ability to strike, but in part of their discussion of this extreme fixture condition, they noted that top players could play theoretically 85 games in a year. That's crazy.
So in the 21-22 season, Liverpool played every game possible to them.
And how many? That was 60 odd games.
I think it was 68 games. So they obviously played every league game. They went to their 2 domestic cup finals,
right?
So the Carabao Cup and the FA Cup finals, and then they made the Champions League final.
It's a lot of games,
and that pretty much completely ruined their following season because a whole host of reasons. This isn't a Liverpool podcast. And I don't particularly want to relive some of those moments as a fan myself. Setting aside what I think or I don't think European teams are going to do, I'm fascinated with how the Sounders actually handle this because it's really not good timing for that, like for them. I don't like they're not going to cancel Leagues Cup because of this.
It's going to be very interesting to see how MLS handles this because you're right. It could. My suspicion is what they'll do is they will give this because like the group stage is like usually played over about a 10-day stretch, so it's not crazy to think that they could just schedule in sort of a break for the Sounders, like essentially give them a bye during that period. But if the Sounders get out of their group, I have to imagine there's going to be league games on their schedule. And are they just going to like delay those games? And like, I really, really hope that they figure out a way to have the Leagues Cup overlapping with the Club World Cup. Now that will create problems because the whole point of Leagues Cup is to draw attention. And if you're competing with the Club World Cup, that's not good for attention, I would imagine. But I don't. This is going to be a mess. It is a scheduling mess. There's no way around it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to say I'm skeptical it even happens because like something called the Club World Cup is going to happen. Then the Sounders are going to play in it, but the sort of like, let's say, integrity of competition, I don't think is going to exist. And I think that I would probably agree with like, it would be really cool to see Real Madrid, whatever version of that. They're like players in Real Madrid jerseys playing in Seattle.
Yeah.
I doubt Jude Bellingham is going to be there. I doubt Mbappe is going to be there. Hey, maybe they have to be. I don't know.
I mean, yeah.
I would just kind of be like, hey, cool. The Sounders played Real Madrid in a competitive game at some point in the, like, it happened. I just don't see the like path to viability for this being, which I think was like the heart of your original question was like, I don't think this is a thing that fans want.
Yeah, I mean, it'll be interesting. I do think that the sound, you know, we just put out a survey on our Twitter account where we asked fans basically how interested they were in this. And these are admittedly Sounder heart readers. So these are people that are inclined to be interested. And right now we have about 250 votes. Half of them have said, I'm going no matter what. And then the other half basically broke into three camps. One was it depends on who they're playing. The other was depends on who the Sounders sign. And the other, there was only 11% that said they don't care. But what I thought was interesting is that it depends on who the Sounders sign is beating depends on who the opponent is 22-16. I do think the Sounders are putting, I don't know if they're doing this on purpose. I don't think they're doing this on purpose. In fact, but I think the Sounders are going to end up putting a lot of pressure on themselves to make some big signings this winter because I think they are putting so much energy. They've already put a lot of energy into promoting the Club World Cup. And especially now that they have 3 games, I think fans are maybe going to wait around and see like, sure, we'll get invested in this, but give us a reason. Like, show us you're serious about this. And the Sounders are going to have the ability to go out and make some big signings this winter. And I think justifiably, a lot of fans are going to say, sure, we'll get into this if you show us you're serious about it. And that doesn't mean, you know, I don't think anyone's going to sit here and be like, oh, they're better than Real Madrid, even if they were to somehow beat a weakened Real Madrid team. But from a Sounders perspective, I do think Sounders fans want to see the Sounders at least not embarrass themselves.
Yeah, but how much of that is actually like to do with the Club World Cup versus like
they just want them to go sign people?
Well, yeah, I mean, the Sounders have kicked this can down the road since
a long time.
let's say since they won
the Champions League. Yeah.
I think that's kind of agreed upon like timeline for this stuff. Some people would probably argue earlier. Cool. Maybe some people would argue later, but I think that the Sounders, regardless of if the Club World Cup is happening or not, have put themselves in a predicament where they have to hit big on winter signings this coming season.
No, I agree.
I think
even if they win MLS Cup, I still think that pressure is the same virtually.
Yes. Yeah. I would say even more so, but
it might be because like if the Sounders can, no one's here predicting the Sounders are going to win MLS Cup, but let's just say through some degree of good fortune and sort of the breaks going their way, they were to win MLS Cup. I don't think that changes anything about the underlying complaints people have about the roster, which is it's missing some high upside players. And if you are seriously going to try to sell the Club World Cup as a real competition, and you're going to sell it as an opportunity to see the Sounders go toe to toe with some of the biggest clubs in the world, you owe it to yourselves to put your best foot forward. And beyond that, I think they also like MLS is what it is in terms of it, on any given team can win on any given week. But I do think that they have to show some ambition when it comes to competing with the top teams in the league, especially if they want to continue to be considered one of the top teams in the league.
Yeah, 100%. I think the Club World Cup happening next summer is detrimental to the Sounders 2025 MLS season.
I definitely think it has the very real potential of sort of undermining their potential for 2025 in that if they were to go on like let's just say they made it to the round of the quarterfinals or something in the Club World Cup, that's going to have knock-on effects of their season for sure. But I also think that they shouldn't do Leagues Cup. I think the Sounders definitely agree with that. No question there. No question there. Well, anyway, that's probably covers most of the ground it wanted to cover.
Let's just
sign some good players. Sign some good players. Why don't we just? That's the message.
And win MLS Cup.
Go win MLS Cup and start by beating the Whitecaps.
Yeah.
All we're asking for is everything.
But nothing short of it.
Yeah, that's what we've been raised to believe we deserve as Sounders fans.
I don't think I think that was a sarcastic dig that I don't think is fair. Sorry for calling you out on that, but I think that at the very least, give us something to hang our hat on this season.
Yeah, I agree. I totally agree. I was being sarcastic, but I was being serious also. Like this is the reason that Sounders fans have high expectations is because the club has encouraged them.
Yeah, like more than that, like told us to have those expectations. Right. Like Joe Ross not around anymore. Around the Sounders, I believe he's still alive. I don't think he's dead.
I think he is. I haven't checked on him lately.
I feel like the Sounders would have done something if.
Yeah, they would have. They would have made a note of it. For sure.
And that's where I get all my like entertainment news. So, anyways, I feel like he really kind of distilled in us fans that like we should expect to win every game, and maybe that's a message that the Sounders should embrace once more.
Yeah. I think that's a good place to end this. I did want to, of course, give ourselves a plug. Please become a subscriber to Sounder at Heart. That's what your subscriber dollars are what make shows like this one possible. They are what make all the great content we put on Sounder at Heart possible. It's what gives Mark reason to get excited about Sounder at Heart himself. But also, thank you, Mark, for doing this. Thank you for filling in for Aaron. I might call on you again before Aaron's back. Who knows?
Cool. I hope Aaron is enjoying
Memphis,
Tennessee.
Yeah,
seems
God,
like
I
a
hope
nice-
they're not hit too hard by all this flooding. Geez, I should check on him.
I think it's on. I think the flooding is more on the eastern side of the state. And my understanding
Okay, good
is
point.
Memphis.
I just know they have big rivers there.
West.
Yeah, good point. No, you're right. Your geography is coming through here. But thank you to Lick It for producing this show. Thanks to Full Pull Wines. Thank you to our existing subscribers as well. I am Jeremiah O'Shan signing off for Nos Audiatis. Remember, you'll never be out alone.
We love you. Let's win another one.